The firing range fell silent as her hands froze on the rifle. Laughter erupted from the other recruits as she stood paralyzed, unable to pull the trigger. "This is why standards matter," the sergeant barked, already turning away in disgust. But something changed in her eyes. She reset her stance, raised the weapon again, and fired 6 shots in rapid succession. The electronic scoreboard flashed frantically before displaying "record broken." Those who had mocked her seconds before now stared in stunned silence as the instructor rushed forward, staring at the impossible grouping where each bullet had split the previous one. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of hidden strength move you, please consider subscribing to help us share more powerful moments of quiet courage that often go untold. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Benning's rifle qualification range, heat waves distorting the air above the baked earth. Dozens of recruits stood in formation, their uniforms already dark with sweat despite the early hour. The day's significance hung heavy in the air. Final qualifications before unit assignments, with commanders observing every move from a covered position behind the firing line. Lieutenant Adira Caney occupied the end position on the firing line, her presence almost deliberately forgettable. Unlike the confident postures of those around her, Adira's stance was carefully unremarkable, competent enough to avoid correction, but not skilled enough to invite attention. Her eyes, however, occasionally scanned the range with an assessment that suggested deeper knowledge than her middling performance would indicate. "Listen up," announced Major Thorson Blackwood, a decorated combat veteran known for his exacting standards. His voice carried effortlessly across the range without needing to shout. "Today isn't just another qualification. Today's top shooter will earn a spot in the upcoming Ranger School class, regardless of previous scores or recommendations." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the ranks. Several recruits straightened noticeably, eyes sharpening with ambition. Sergeant Zephyr Rhodes, who had established herself as the alpha shooter of the class, exchanged confident glances with her tight-knit group of high performers. They had dominated the top of the qualification board since week 1, making their superiority clear to everyone, especially those they deemed unworthy of notice. Adira's reaction was subtle but distinct, a momentary stillness that suggested internal conflict before she deliberately relaxed back into her unremarkable posture. This slight change didn't escape the notice of Captain Meridian Vale, a quiet but observant officer standing near Major Blackwood. Her eyes lingered on Adira with newfound interest. "First group, approach the firing line," called the range officer. 6 recruits moved forward, Zephyr among them. They took their positions with practiced efficiency, checking their weapons with confident movements. When the command to fire came, they executed with precision. The electronic scoring system displayed their results in real time on large monitors, and Zephyr's near-perfect score drew appreciative murmurs from the observing recruits. "That's how it's done," Zephyr announced loudly as she stepped back from the line, looking toward the remaining recruits with smug confidence. Her gaze passed over Adira without recognition, the ultimate dismissal. Group after group proceeded through qualification, the electronic scoreboard telling the story of who belonged among the elite and who merely passed. When Adira's group was finally called, Zephyr and her circle lingered to watch, expecting nothing noteworthy, but always eager to reinforce the hierarchy they'd established. Adira took her position, checking her weapon with movements that were just slightly off from standard procedure, effective but not textbook. As she raised her rifle to firing position and the range officer called out, "Commence fire!" something unexpected happened. Adira froze, her trigger finger suddenly rigid, her breathing irregular. Behind her eyes flashed fragmented images, bright lights, a crowded stadium, cameras flashing, a crucial moment in competition. The flashback ended abruptly as laughter erupted from Zephyr's group. "Stage fright, Caney," Zephyr called out, prompting more laughter from her followers. "Guess some people just aren't built for pressure." Major Blackwood approached with visible disappointment. "Step back, Lieutenant. Collect yourself." The humiliation was palpable as everyone watched her apparent failure. Rather than immediately obeying, Adira lowered her rifle slowly, her expression unreadable. Instead of stepping away, she closed her eyes briefly, taking a deliberate breath that seemed to reset something within her. Captain Vale watched with increased interest, recognizing something in Adira's procedure that seemed oddly familiar. When Adira reopened her eyes, something had changed, a focus and presence that wasn't there before. She raised her rifle again, but with a completely different stance, textbook perfect with subtle refinements that only an expert would recognize. Major Blackwood began to intervene but stopped when Adira fired her first shot. The electronic scoring system beeped confirmation of a perfect bullseye, not just a hit, but centered with a precision that caused the system to highlight the shot specially. The range fell silent as Adira prepared for her second shot. What followed defied the expectations of everyone present. Adira fired systematically, each shot not just hitting the bullseye, but striking with impossible precision. The scoring system registered consecutive, perfect zeros, shots that hit the absolute center of the target. When she hit the same spot twice, splitting her previous bullet, the system triggered an error message, unprepared for such precision. Captain Vale moved closer to Major Blackwood, speaking in a hushed tone. That stance, that breathing pattern. I've seen it before, sir. Major Blackwood's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. The Sarajevo technique, he responded quietly. But that's only used by... He didn't finish the sentence, instead studying Adira with new intensity. For her last round, Adira adjusted her position slightly, a modification that seemed strange until she fired. The shot struck at an angle that should be impossible given wind conditions and distance. The scoring system froze momentarily, then flashed new record across the display. A record that had stood for 8 years at Fort Benning had just been broken by a recruit who previously showed only mediocre skills. Complete silence fell over the range as recruits processed what they had witnessed. Zephyr's expression transformed from mockery to confusion to dawning recognition. "That's not possible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Major Blackwood stepped forward, studying Adira with new intensity. "Lieutenant Caney, secure your weapon and report to my office immediately." As Adira secured her rifle, her hands returned to their slightly awkward positioning, a deliberate regression to her previous persona. But it was too late. The other recruits gave her a wide berth, whispers spreading rapidly. Captain Vale was already on her phone, stepping away for a private conversation. "Sir, I need to verify something about Lieutenant Caney's personnel file. Yes, it's urgent." In Major Blackwood's office, Adira stood at attention, her expression carefully neutral as the Major studied her across his desk. "Do you want to explain what happened out there, Lieutenant?" Blackwood asked. "Good day, sir. Found my rhythm," she responded vaguely. "That wasn't finding your rhythm. That was world-class marksmanship, the kind that takes years of specialized training." Adira remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Captain Vale entered with a file, nodding to Major Blackwood. "Your file says you joined from civilian life, no prior military experience," Blackwood continued. "That's correct, sir." "Then perhaps you can explain this," Vale said, placing a tablet on the desk. The screen showed a news article with a photograph, partially obscured, but showing a woman on an Olympic podium. Though the hairstyle and some features were different, the resemblance to Adira was unmistakable. "The timestamp on this is 3 years ago," Vale noted, watching Adira's reaction carefully. "We value integrity in this unit, Lieutenant," Blackwood said. "Hiding your abilities is a form of deception." "I never claimed to be less than I am, sir. I simply performed to the level required." "Why? With skills like that, you could have had your pick of assignments." Adira's carefully maintained facade began to crack slightly. "Sometimes visibility isn't an advantage, sir." Major Blackwood revealed that their unit had received orders for a classified operation. "We need a precision shooter, someone who can make the impossible shot when everything is on the line." The implication was clear. Her cover might be blown, but her skills were needed. "Whatever you're running from, Lieutenant, it's caught up with you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" As Adira left the office, she found other recruits waiting outside, Zephyr at the front. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to hostility to newfound respect. A recruit stepped forward with a phone, showing a clearer image of the Olympic podium photo, revealing Adira's face, though she looked very different then. "It is you, isn't it?" he asked. Adira, Perfect Zero, Caney, the woman who never missed. That evening, the entire unit gathered in the battalion assembly hall. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as rumors had been circulating rapidly since the range incident. Many recruits had spent the afternoon searching for information about Perfect Zero, Caney, finding videos of her Olympic performances and the mysterious end to her competitive career. Major Blackwood addressed the assembled soldiers with Captain Vale at his side. Today we witnessed something extraordinary on our range, a base record broken by someone who, until now, has chosen to hide in plain sight. He gestured for Adira to step forward. She did so reluctantly, her discomfort with being the center of attention obvious to everyone. Many of you have already figured it out. Lieutenant Adira Caney is actually former Olympic gold medalist Adira Caney, three-time world champion in precision rifle. A murmur swept through the room as confirmation of rumors solidified into fact. What many of you don't know is why one of the greatest competitive shooters in history would join our ranks and hide her abilities. Major Blackwood explained the basics of Adira's past, her unprecedented Olympic performances, her nickname, Perfect Zero, for her ability to hit dead center consistently, and the development of the Sarajevo technique that revolutionized competitive shooting. But he deliberately omitted the final chapter of her competitive career, leaving that story untold. As of 0600 tomorrow, our unit begins preparation for Operation Distant Echo. He shared classified details about a high-stakes mission requiring exceptional marksmanship skills beyond what most military snipers possessed. This operation requires a level of precision that, frankly, I wasn't sure we had in our ranks. Until today. The implication was clear. Adira's skills would be central to the mission's success. This announcement created a visible shift in how other recruits regarded her, from curiosity about her past to assessment of her value to their collective future. Zephyr stepped forward unexpectedly. "Permission to speak freely, sir." When granted, she addressed both the command and her fellow soldiers. "With respect, how can we trust someone who's been lying to us for months, who deliberately underperformed? What else is she hiding?" The question resonated with many in the room, creating visible tension. Major Blackwood looked to Adira, giving her the opportunity to respond. After a moment of hesitation, Adira stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, but determined to address the issue directly. 3 years ago, at the World Championship Finals in Geneva, I was the favorite to win my 4th title. She described the intense pressure, the expectations, the cameras, the crowds, all focusing on her as she prepared for her final shot. During my final shot, the one that would have broken the world record, something happened. The room fell silent as she described a panic attack that struck without warning. I couldn't pull the trigger. My body simply wouldn't respond. In front of millions of viewers worldwide, I froze. She detailed the aftermath, the public humiliation that followed, diagnoses of performance anxiety and PTSD, sponsors dropping her, and the relentless media coverage that turned her moment of vulnerability into endless content for sports psychologists and armchair critics to dissect. I joined the army to disappear, to find purpose without the weight of expectations. She looked directly at Zephyr. I wasn't lying. I was surviving. Captain Vale stepped forward, sharing her own experience with performance anxiety during a critical operation early in her career. What Lieutenant Caney experienced is not weakness. It's a human response to inhuman pressure. She explained how Adira's methods for managing her condition could actually benefit the unit. The techniques she developed to overcome her condition make her more valuable, not less. Major Blackwood called the room to attention. Lieutenant Caney didn't hide her abilities out of deception, but out of necessity. And today, when it mattered, those abilities were there. He formally recognized her achievement on the range with a commendation. Sometimes the strongest among us are those who have faced their breaking points and found a way forward. He saluted her, not as a formality, but as a genuine mark of respect. One by one, other soldiers joined in the salute, including, finally, Zephyr. As the assembly concluded, soldiers approached Adira individually. Some apologized for past dismissals, others asked tentative questions about her techniques. Captain Vale observed from a distance as the wall between Adira and her unit began to dissolve. "Sometimes being seen is the hardest battle of all," she commented to Major Blackwood. The following weeks transformed both Adira and the unit. What began as specialized training for Operation Distant Echo evolved into something more significant. Adira stepped into a new role as both operator and instructor, working with small groups to share techniques that had transformed competitive shooting. Zephyr, initially, Resistant became one of her most dedicated students. The breathing technique you showed me yesterday added 15% to my accuracy, Zephyr admitted during one session. It's not about being perfect, Adira explained. It's about knowing how to reset when things go wrong. This philosophy became increasingly important as training intensified. During a high-pressure simulation designed to replicate mission conditions, Adira experienced another panic attack when unexpected elements mirrored her competition trauma. This time, instead of hiding her struggle, she demonstrated her recovery technique in real time. "This is part of it," she explained to the watching soldiers once she had regained control. "The difference isn't never struggling, it's knowing how to come back." The vulnerability she had feared would undermine her authority actually strengthened the unit's respect for her. Other soldiers began sharing their own performance challenges, creating an atmosphere of mutual support that enhanced overall effectiveness. As the operation date approached, Major Blackwood reviewed the final parameters with the team. The critical shot would be at extreme range, under challenging environmental conditions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. 3 years ago, I would have guaranteed success, Adira admitted during the briefing. Now, I can only promise my best. Your best with full awareness of your limitations is worth more than false confidence, Blackwood responded. This exchange marked a turning point in Adira's relationship with her past. For the first time, she began to see her failure not as an ending, but as a transition from one kind of excellence to another, more human form of mastery. Captain Vale reinforced this perspective during a private conversation. "The military taught me to hide weakness. It nearly cost me everything." She revealed that she had recognized Adira's techniques because she had studied them herself after her own struggles with performance anxiety. "Your failure in Geneva actually helped countless others who saw themselves in your struggle. You became more relatable in that moment of vulnerability than you ever were in your moments of perfection." This perspective shifted Adira's view of her past for the first time. What she had experienced as personal humiliation had actually created a point of connection for others facing similar challenges. The night before deployment, Zephyr approached with the rest of the unit, presenting Adira with a modified scope for her rifle. "We had it custom engraved," she explained. The scope bore the words Perfect Zero alongside the unit insignia. "Not because you never miss," Zephyr clarified, "but because you always find your center again." It was a reclamation of the nickname that had once haunted her, transformed into a symbol of resilience rather than unattainable perfection. Operation Distant Echo placed Adira and her spotter, Zephyr, in a remote position in unspecified territory. After 3 days of careful movement and positioning, they reached the designated location for the crucial shot that would determine the mission's success. Conditions were even more challenging than anticipated. Wind patterns were unpredictable, visibility limited by unusual atmospheric conditions. The target would only be in position for a narrow window of time, giving them exactly one opportunity to succeed. Adira prepared methodically, applying everything she had reintegrated from her competitive past, alongside the new techniques developed during her recovery. Her movements were precise but not rigid, confident but not overconfident. "Range to target?" she asked, completely focused on the task ahead. 1,420 meters, beyond what we trained for, Zephyr responded, concern evident in her voice. "But not beyond what I've done before," Adira replied, making minute adjustments to her position. As Adira prepared to take the shot, familiar symptoms began: increased heart rate, tightening chest, the first waves of a potential panic response. Rather than fighting these sensations or trying to hide them, she acknowledged them openly to Zephyr, using their now-established protocol. "I need 30 seconds to reset," she stated calmly. Zephyr provided the support they had practiced, helping Adira find her center through a series of wolf prompts and confirmations. "Whenever you're ready, the team trusts you." Adira completed her reset procedure, finding her focus not through the elimination of anxiety, but through its integration into her awareness. She took the impossible shot with calm precision, the rifle's report echoing across the landscape. Through the communication system, the team confirmed success moments later. The mission's primary objective had been achieved through a shot that most would have considered beyond human capability. "Perfect Zero," Zephyr confirmed with a smile, the term now representing recovery rather than perfection. Back at base 2 weeks later, Major Blackwood debriefed the successful operation with the entire unit present. Lieutenant Caney's shot made this possible, but it was this unit's integration of her knowledge that ensured overall mission success. He announced a new training protocol being implemented across multiple bases. The Caney Protocol for Performance Recovery would transform Adira's personal techniques into standard training for all special operations units. What we've learned here goes beyond marksmanship, Blackwood explained. It's about performance under pressure in any domain. It's about resilience in the face of potential failure. What had once marked Adira's greatest shame had become her most significant contribution. Not the medals or records, but the hard-won wisdom that came from falling and rising again. After the debriefing, Adira met with Captain Vale, who had orders for her new assignment. Marksmanship School has requested you as an instructor, Vale explained, handing over the transfer papers. Vale revealed that Adira's techniques were being studied for application beyond the military, in first responder training, medical education, and even returning to the sports world where her journey had begun. Your greatest contribution wasn't the shot you made. It's showing others how to recover when they miss. Adira considered this new path, not hiding from her past, but transforming it into something valuable for others. The perfection she had once pursued had been replaced by something more meaningful, the ability to help others find their way back from failure. 6 months later, at the range where it all began, Adira led a specialized training session for a new group of recruits. They watched as she demonstrated not just perfect technique, but also recovery from deliberately induced errors. Perfect isn't the goal, she told them as they prepared to practice. Resilience is. Among her assistant instructors were Zephyr and several other members from her original unit, each now incorporating resilience training into their respective specialties. The legacy of Perfect Zero had been redefined, from a standard impossible to maintain to a process anyone could learn. After the session, a young recruit approached her hesitantly. "Before joining, I saw your Geneva competition," she admitted. "I almost quit competing because I thought, if it could happen to you, what chance did I have? And now?" Adira asked. "Now I understand it differently. You didn't just show us how to shoot. You showed us how to fail and come back stronger." Adira nodded, recognizing her own journey in the recruit's words. "The target isn't perfection," she said. "It's getting up one more time than you fall." That evening, Adira stood alone on the empty range, taking a moment to acknowledge how far she had come. She raised her rifle, going through the motions that had once been her entire identity. The familiar weight felt different now, not a burden of expectation, but a tool for connection and growth. She fired a single shot, hitting the center of the target with characteristic precision. But unlike before, the location of the shot wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the calm center she had found within herself, not because she never struggled, but because she had learned that struggle was part of the journey rather than its end. The name Perfect Zero had once represented an impossible standard that had eventually broken her. Now it represented something far more valuable, the point of balance from which one could fall and rise again, the center that remained even when everything else seemed lost. As she secured her weapon and prepared to leave the range, Adira reflected on how seeking invisibility had ultimately led her to be truly seen, not for her perfection, but for her humanity. In sharing her vulnerability, she had found a strength greater than any medal could represent. The instructional program, developed from Adira's techniques, quickly gained attention beyond Fort Benning. Military psychologists who had been studying performance under pressure found that her integrated approach, which acknowledged anxiety rather than trying to eliminate it, showed remarkable results across various high-stress military occupations. Captain Vale, who had become the program's strongest advocate within the command structure, arranged for Adira to present her methods to the Joint Chiefs Special Working Group on combat effectiveness. The presentation focused not on marksmanship specifically, but on the broader applications of her recovery techniques. "What makes Lieutenant Caney's approach unique," Vale explained to the assembled brass, "is that it doesn't try to create perfect soldiers. It creates resilient ones who can recover from imperfection." This fundamental shift in perspective, from pursuing flawlessness to developing recovery capability, challenged decades of military training philosophy. Some senior officers remained skeptical, preferring traditional approaches focused on minimizing error rather than responding to it. But the empirical results spoke for themselves. Units that implemented the Caney protocol showed significant improvements in performance sustainability under extended stress conditions. More importantly, they demonstrated faster recovery from mission complications and setbacks. Word spread to civilian agencies as well. FBI SWAT teams, emergency medical services, and disaster response organizations all began implementing variations of Adira's techniques. The common thread was simple but profound. Acknowledge human limitations, prepare for moments of failure, and develop systematic approaches to recovery. For Adira personally, this widening influence brought both satisfaction and new challenges. The visibility she had once fled now found her again, though in a very different context. Rather than being celebrated for inhuman perfection, she was now recognized for her very human journey through imperfection toward resilience. "How does it feel?" a journalist asked during a rare interview for a military publication. "To have your greatest professional failure become the foundation of your greatest contribution?" Adira considered the question carefully. "For years, I saw what happened in Geneva as the end of something. Now I understand it was the beginning of something more valuable." She paused, finding precisely the right words. Perfect performance is temporary. It lasts for one shot, one competition, one moment. But the ability to recover from failure serves you for life. This perspective resonated deeply with many who had faced their own moments of very public failure. Letters arrived from athletes, surgeons, pilots, and performers, all sharing how her story had helped them reframe their own experiences of falling short under pressure. Zephyr, who had continued to work closely with Adira on developing the training program, noticed the impact these connections had on her mentor. "You never smiled like this when you were winning gold medals," she observed one day after a particularly successful training session. "Winning separates you from others," Adira replied. "This connects me to them." That connection became even more apparent when the Olympic Committee invited Adira to speak at a special conference on athlete mental health. The event would take place in Geneva, the same city where her competitive career had ended so dramatically 3 years earlier. The invitation triggered mixed emotions. Returning to Geneva meant confronting memories she had worked hard to integrate, but had never fully revisited in their physical context. It meant standing in the same venue where she had experienced her most public vulnerability. "You don't have to go," Captain Vale told her when Adira shared her concerns. "Your work here is more than enough." "That's why I need to go," Adira decided after careful consideration. To complete the circle, to stand in that place not as someone fleeing from failure, but as someone who found a way through it. The journey to Geneva was a pilgrimage of sorts, a conscious return to the site of her greatest public humiliation, now transformed by the perspective she had gained. Walking into the venue where the fateful competition had taken place, Adira felt the expected wave of anxiety, the physical memories of that moment when her body had refused to obey her commands. But alongside those familiar sensations came something new, a deeper awareness of how that moment of failure had opened a door to something more meaningful than another gold medal could ever have been. Her presentation to the Olympic community wasn't about technique or performance enhancement. It was about humanity and vulnerability, about the costs of pursuing perfection and the freedom found in embracing imperfection. "The paradox I've discovered," she told the assembled athletes, coaches, and officials, "is that accepting your limitations actually expands your capabilities. When you're no longer paralyzed by the fear of failure, you're free to discover what lies beyond it." The standing ovation that followed wasn't for her past achievements, but for the courage to transform her most painful experience into wisdom that could serve others. Several active competitors sought her out afterward, sharing their own struggles with performance anxiety and the crushing weight of expectations. One young shooter, currently ranked the world #1, admitted that Adira's Geneva moment had actually been playing on his mind for years. "I've been terrified the same thing would happen to me," he confessed. "Watching you come back from it, not to competition but to something even more meaningful, helps me put it in perspective." This, Adira realized, was the true legacy of Perfect Zero, not a nickname representing unattainable perfection, but a philosophy centered on finding balance in imperfection. The zero wasn't a score anymore, it was a starting point, the center from which all recovery began. Upon returning to Fort Benning, Adira found that her absence had only increased interest in the program. The waiting list for her training sessions now included representatives from every branch of the military, each eager to learn not just shooting techniques, but the mental resilience framework she had developed. "We've had to expand the program," Major Blackwood informed her. "3 additional instructors have been certified in your methods, with more in training." "Are they teaching the full protocol?" Adira asked, concerned that the psychological components might be oversimplified in her absence. "Absolutely," Blackwood confirmed. "The integration of technical skill with psychological resilience is what makes this work. We understand that now." This validation meant more to Adira than any medal or record ever had. She had created something that would outlast her, something that acknowledged rather than denied the reality of human limitation while providing a path through it. As she walked across the base that had become her unexpected home, Adira noticed a group of new recruits practicing at the range where her journey had taken its dramatic turn. They were implementing her breathing techniques and, more importantly, supporting each other through moments of struggle rather than mocking perceived weakness. The culture was changing, slowly but perceptibly, moving away from the false ideal of the perfect warrior toward the more useful reality of the resilient one. Imperfection was no longer something to be hidden, but something to be worked with, integrated, and ultimately transformed. In that moment, watching these young soldiers practice not just marksmanship, but recovery, Adira felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose unmarred by the weight of expectation. She wasn't Perfect Zero anymore, the woman who never missed. She was something more valuable, the woman who had missed spectacularly and found her way back, bringing others with her. That evening, as the sun set over Fort Benning, Adira returned to the now empty range. Taking up position, she raised her rifle and deliberately created conditions for failure, shifting her stance just enough to compromise stability. When she fired and the shot landed outside the bullseye, she smiled, completed her reset procedure, and fired again. Perfect center. The journey from shot to shot, from failure to recovery, was where the real mastery lay. It always had been. She had simply needed to fail publicly to discover this truth that had been there all along. We've noticed unusual query volume. Please contact us, mail to heyu.com with the following error ID 12F99376 8906 4119 9BDC BB90F3F0856F 24E 793A E6B7460As A969 CBCB 290 Indeed 569 2025 at 10 the right T 5595558Z. On answering your question with the express agent months after her return from Geneva, Adira. Kaney's name was spoken with new respect in military circles, though for reasons far different from those that had once made her a global sports headline. Instead of Perfect Zero, meaning the shooter who never missed, it had come to represent the resilient leader who knew how to rise after every fall. At Fort Benning, the Kaney Protocol was now standard part of marksmanship and resilience training, and Adira found herself both instructor and mentor to a growing wave of soldiers, law enforcement officers, and even athletes seeking her guidance. Every session began with the same phrase: "Perfect isn't the goal, resilience is." The recruits listened intently, many drawn not by her fame, but by the hope that she could help them find a way through their own struggles with performance and self-doubt. The range had transformed from a place of silent judgment to a space marked by encouragement, honest talk about mental health, and a sense of shared effort. Soldiers who once boasted about never cracking under pressure now discussed their strategies for bouncing back when things did not go according to plan. Zephyr, now an assistant instructor, and one of Adira's closest friends, quickly became a role model in her own right. Her early skepticism had given way to a deep respect for Adira's methods, and she was quick to champion the idea that strength was not just about technical skill, but about the ability to adapt. "You taught me that missing a shot isn't the end of the story," Zephyr told a group during a training break. "It's what you do next that matters." At the same time, the military's adoption of the Kaney Protocol drew attention from outside the armed forces. Law enforcement agencies, EMT teams, and even competitive sports coaches began reaching out, eager to adapt her recovery techniques for their own high-pressure environments. Adira was invited to present at conferences and workshops, and her once guarded story became a powerful teaching tool about the value of vulnerability and the reality that even the best can falter. For Adira, each new encounter brought reminders of her journey, She saw herself in the nervous recruit on the firing line, the young paramedic describing a shaky hand after a failed rescue, the Olympic hopeful who wondered if a single mistake would define her forever. In each case, Adira quietly encouraged them to confront their anxiety, to accept it, and to develop small, repeatable rituals to find their way back to focus. She never claimed to have all the answers, but her presence, her honesty, and her willingness to share her own failures made her advice feel real. One bright morning at Fort Benning, the range was alive with activity for a demonstration attended by high-ranking officers and civilian dignitaries. Some doubted whether the Caney Protocol could work outside Adira's unique presence. To prove its value, a young recruit who had struggled with qualification was selected to shoot. Under observation, the recruit's first shot was wide, the pressure visible on her face. Instead of scolding, Adira gently approached. "Take a breath. Remember your process. Missing is not failure. Reset and try again." The recruit nodded, performed the steps she had practiced, and on her next attempt, landed a perfect center shot. Applause broke out across the range, not just for the bullseye, but for the demonstration that recovery, not perfection, was the true milestone. Officers took note, and Adira's approach soon became a model for other programs, including advanced pilot training and special operations assessment courses. As her reputation grew, Adira received a letter from the Olympic Committee inviting her to help redesign the athlete support protocols for the upcoming Games. The committee wanted her to consult on ways to better prepare athletes for the psychological challenges of competition and to offer workshops on resilience and recovery. Standing once again in Geneva, this time as a teacher, not a competitor, Adira felt the strange comfort of coming full circle. She addressed a room of young athletes and their coaches, many of whom knew her only as the legend who once froze at the most critical moment. "Everyone here knows the pressure of expectation," she began, "but your value isn't defined by a single shot, race, or match. How you recover, how you grow from what doesn't go your way, will define your legacy far more than any medal." The room was quiet, many faces reflecting the anxiety she knew so well. A swimmer in the front row raised her hand. "How do you stop being afraid?" Adira smiled gently. "You don't. You learn to work with the fear, to honor it as part of your process. Fear is a sign that you care. Let it remind you to breathe, to focus on what you can control, and to trust the work you've done." After the session, a steady line of athletes waited to speak with her, some asking for technical advice, others sharing personal stories of loss and recovery. One fencer, tears in his eyes, thanked her for making it okay to talk about what went wrong, instead of pretending everything was perfect. Returning to the U.S., Adira was welcomed with a new sense of peace. She had become part of a movement that was changing not just how people performed under pressure, but how they viewed themselves before, during, and after those critical moments. Her story, once a cautionary tale, had become a blueprint for hope. At Fort Benning, she continued to refine the Caney Protocol with Zephyr and Captain Vale, who had since been promoted and now led resilience integration across several bases. They experimented with new drills, including group recovery exercises and scenario-based stress training. The program was adapted for remote settings, allowing deployed units to receive real-time support from resilience coaches. One day, a group of new instructors gathered for training. Among them was a young woman named Isla, who had once watched Adira's Olympic heartbreak on television. Isla admitted she had nearly quit shooting altogether, convinced that if someone like Adira could fall, there was no hope for her. But after learning about the Caney Protocol and seeing how Adira had rebuilt her life, Isla found new purpose. "You showed me that it's okay to start over," Isla said. "That's what I want to teach others." Hearing this, Adira realized just how far-reaching her impact had become. She now measured her success not by medals or records, but by the resilience she saw in those she taught. The culture of Fort Benning and beyond was changing. Leaders began to speak openly about setbacks, and after-action reviews included not just what went right, but how teams had handled what went wrong. Zephyr, ever the quick learner, began presenting at conferences, her talks filled with stories of recruits who had stumbled, recovered, and later become top performers. She often quoted Adira, reminding her audiences that the true legacy of a leader is not in flawless execution, but in teaching others to rise. As the years passed, Adira's influence spread internationally. Military exchange programs sent instructors to Fort Benning, eager to bring the Caney Protocol back to their home countries. Elite athletes and coaches traveled long distances just to spend a week training under her guidance. Law enforcement agencies credited her methods with reducing burnout and improving decision-making in the tense situations. Despite the recognition, Adira kept her daily routines simple. She still preferred early mornings on the range, working with a handful of recruits, savoring the small victories. She never forgot the lesson that had cost her so much. The key to enduring success is not avoiding failure, but cultivating the ability to begin again. On the anniversary of her fateful day in Geneva, Adira returned to the range alone. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow over the targets. She set up her rifle, went through her breathing exercises, and remembered the moment her hands had once frozen. This time, there was no pressure, no crowd, just the gentle rhythm of her own breath. She fired a single shot, not caring where it landed. Then she fired again and again, each time focusing more on the process than the result. In the silence, she reflected on everything she had learned. The medals, the records, the failures, the recovery, all of it had brought her to this quiet place of acceptance. Later that day, she spoke with a new class of recruits, one of whom asked, "What does it feel like to be perfect zero?" Adira smiled, shaking her head. "It feels like being human. It means I've missed more times than I can count, but I kept coming back. The name isn't about never failing. It's about never letting failure have the last word." As the recruits filed out, Zephyr lingered. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" Adira considered this for a moment. "If they had, I might have won more medals, but I would have missed out on all of this, the chance to make a real difference. I wouldn't trade that for anything." That evening, Fort Benning held a small ceremony to recognize the program's success. Captain Vale spoke about the courage it takes to face your own limits and the power of leaders who teach others to do the same. "Adira Caney turned her hardest moment into a gift for all of us," she said. "That's the heart of true resilience." As the crowd applauded, Adira stood quietly at the edge, content to let others take the spotlight. She had found peace in her own story, knowing that her greatest contribution was not a perfect record, but the hope she gave to those still finding their way. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of unrecognized heroes move you, please consider subscribing to help us share more powerful moments of quiet strength that often go untold.